Well, good morning and welcome to the Kern Airmanship Model in Detail webinar series. And this week we're going to talk about self, which is the first of the 5 pillars of knowledge in the Kern Airmanship Model. I notice we've got some folks here, I'm seeing their names for the first time, so let me introduce myself. Since you don't know who I am, since you haven't attended any prior webinars or seminars, I'm Dave Cook. I've got about 50 years in the aviation industry as an airline pilot, 22 years for United, military pilot, 10 years flying helicopters for the Army Guard. Been a corporate pilot for about 6 years total during my career, and been a flight instructor for 45 years, ground instructor for 13 years, for a lot more, but that should give you a quick overview of my experience and who's telling you what I'm about to tell you. This is session 5 of 11 webinars in the series. If you're new to these webinars, let me give you just a quick cockpit orientation here. This white arrow and the orange rectangle will collapse your control panel, which you should be seeing now in the right-hand side of your screen. And if you click on it again, it'll expand the control panel. If you want to send me a question or a comment via text, you can type it in here, hit the send button. A little more efficient way to do it, however, if you have a question or comment, just raise your hand by clicking on this raise your hand icon. And I'd like to verify the system's working okay right now. Would you please raise your hand by clicking on that icon? Okay, just about everybody's got their hand up. Robert Newman, I don't see your hand up. Click on that icon, please. Okay, I'm going to put all your hands down. We'll move along. This is a WINGS program webinar, so you do receive 1 knowledge credit for attending the webinar. And I have all your names here that are logged on and email addresses, so I will go into the FAAsafety.gov website probably tomorrow. It's usually available for closeout by the day after, and I'll give you credit for attending, but don't expect to see the credit show up on your account for maybe as much as a week or two. The FAA, for some reason, there seems to be a real bottleneck there in the showing the credit in your account, but you'll get it. Just be patient. In addition to the FAST team, the other webinar sponsor today is the Center for Airmanship Excellence. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Airmanship Excellence, and the Center for Airmanship Excellence is purpose is exactly that, helping guys who want to become expert airmen. You'll find a lot of resources there on the site. Here's a quick overview of the whole webinar series just so we can orient ourselves. Session 1, we took a look at an overview of the whole Kern Airmanship model. Then we started getting into the details on the 10 elements of the model, starting in webinar 2 with flight discipline, skill in 3, and proficiency in 4. And those 3, 2, 3, and 4, number 2, 3, and 4, are the bedrock principles of the Kern Airmanship model. In this webinar, we're going to talk about self. And the next one, aircraft, then team, environment, and risk. And those are the 5 pillars of knowledge in the Kern Airmanship model. And then in session 10, we're going to talk about situational awareness, and then finally judgment in number 11. And those are the capstone outcomes in the Kern Airmanship model. Well, I know that those of you who have attended this before, it's going to be a little redundant, but again, we have quite a few new people here. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about why we're looking at airmanship development now. The reason that we set up the Center for Airmanship Excellence and we're holding these series of webinars and seminars and airmanship excellence events and a lot of other things to help folks become better airmen is that we believe that airmanship development provides new challenges. And if you're like me, and most pilots, I think this is true of, got into flying because they like to tackle challenges and master new challenges. And unfortunately, the way that our system is set up now, where, for example, you get a private license, and then the next challenge, formal challenge, is the instrument rating, that's a big jump. A lot of time, money, effort between private and instrument. But we believe that if you have airmanship challenges that are smaller bites, less expensive, less time consuming, easier to accomplish, that always improve your airmanship, that then you'll stay more interested and you'll be more likely to fly more and pursue these airmanship challenges. Of course, the quest for airmanship excellence is rewarding. It's personally rewarding because you get that sense of accomplishment when you earn new qualifications, you rise to a higher level of airmanship. But it's also rewarding in other ways. For example, the quest for airmanship excellence increases your personal safety, and that's rewarding to you, enhances your personal longevity, but it's also rewarding to your significant others. You'll be around longer if you're a better pilot. And it's also rewarding to your passengers because you're a safer pilot, and even to the people under your flight paths. We believe that if we can convince enough pilots, and I call them personal flyers, people who are flying for their own personal transportation or recreation, if we can show enough of the personal flyers that this is the way to go and they adopt this approach, then we will overall increase general aviation safety, which, as you probably know, is nowhere near as safe as airlines and charter operations. In fact, it's 34 times more dangerous statistically than airline flying. Airmanship development, just because of what it is, requires increased flight activity. You want to become a better airman, you have to fly more. In the mid-'80s, in the U.S., we were flying about 35 million piston hours a year. Now we're down to about 14 million a year. The result of that is the dwindling infrastructure that supports our personal flying. Like, we went from 12,000 FBOs in the early 80s to 4,000 now, and we're still losing about 400 a year. If we fly more, that will support the businesses that support us. And we believe that increased flight activity overall will reduce costs. If we get more airplanes being produced, the average cost of the airplane should come down, because one of the major factors in the cost of a new light aircraft is the product liability insurance the manufacturers have to pay. Well, right now they're spreading the cost of that those premiums over last year. Only 889 single-engine piston aircraft were produced in the U.S. And if you contrast that with the way it was in the early 80s, where there were about 20,000 produced, 20,000 versus 889, you can see that spreading those product liability premium costs over more airplanes should reduce the cost of airplanes, and it should also reduce or at least slow the growth in costs in all other areas of our personal flying. So those are the main reasons why we think we all ought to be looking at airmanship development. And here's the big airmanship question. I ask this frequently. In fact, I've used this as my personal go, no-go checklist, if you will. Here's the question. If I don't fly right, should I fly at all? And I ask myself that question before I fly every time. And we'll get into more details on that as we go through the series here. The whole webinar series is based on the book, Redefining Airmanship by Dr./Colonel Tony Kern. Dr. Kern was in the Air Force Training Command for most of his career. He's written 5 books on airmanship. This is just one of them, Redefining Airmanship. Again, we base this series on this book. But he's really, literally, the guy that wrote the book or books on airmanship. And I can't find anything in this book that I disagree with, and the other guys that I've talked to, senior pilots who have read it, agree with me. So I think you can be confident as we talk about the things in these webinar series that they are authoritative and they are coming from the guy that knows the most about airmanship. If there are any discrepancies between what Kern is saying and what we're thinking, I'll certainly point them out for you. And the book was published in 1997, but it's not dated at all. Everything in that book still holds true. Let's start out by reviewing our shared definition of airmanship, since we have so many new guys on here today. We look at this from the point of view of what an expert airman is. Expert airmen possess discipline, skill, and proficiency. Expert airmen have a thorough understanding of themselves, their aircraft, their team, the environments, actually this should be plural, the environments that they operate in, and the risks they face. And expert airmen consistently display exceptional situational awareness and use good judgment at all times. So key words: consistently, at all times, and exceptional. So you've got to be, you can't just achieve good judgment every now and then make mistakes and have bad judgment the rest of the time. It's got to be consistent and exceptional. So that's our shared definition of airmanship. Let's take a quick overview look at the Kern Airmanship model. And really it's the scaffold upon which we build our airmanship skills and capabilities. There are other ways of building your airmanship skills and capabilities, but what we think has been missing in the personal flying world that has been in existence in the professional flying world for about 20, 30 years now is this scaffold upon which you can build your airmanship skills and capabilities. So we have chosen the Kern Airmanship model as our scaffold. We think it does the job. Now, if you haven't seen the model before, I think you're going to find it to be very interesting. Those of you who have been seeing it throughout the webinar series, as you know, I always say repetition is good. I'm to the point now where I can spout all these 10 elements off and tell you what they all mean and talk about them, because I've been doing this for about 1.5 years now. And it does take that repetition, though, before you become that comfortable with the model. So there are 3 bedrock principles, as I mentioned: flight discipline, skill, and proficiency. And upon those 3 bedrock principles rest the 5 pillars of knowledge: knowledge of self, knowledge of the aircraft we're flying, knowledge of the team we operate with, knowledge of the environments that we operate in, like the regulatory environment, the physical environment, the organizational environment. So there are multiple environments that we're always operating within, and the risks we face. And on top of those 5 pillars of knowledge rest the capstone outcomes that we're looking for: situational awareness and judgment. Let me say that again in just a little different way. If we practice consistently the bedrock principles of flight discipline, skill, and proficiency, while always striving for more perfect knowledge of ourselves, our aircraft, the team that we operate with, the environments we operate in, and the risks we face, then we can expect the capstone outcomes of ever-improving situational awareness and judgment. And if you think about this a little bit, I think you'll agree with me that you could use this model to plan your training, to plan your airmanship development, so you get better skills and higher proficiency. You can use it to think about how you fly, for critiquing your flight after every flight. So it's useful for a lot of different things. But I think the main thing it's useful for is it gives us all a common framework so that we can talk about airmanship and continue to improve our airmanship. All right, let's get into the meat of this webinar. We're going to talk about the first pillar of knowledge, which is knowledge of ourselves. Socrates said, the Greek philosopher, know thyself, and that's held true throughout the centuries, throughout the millennia. And especially true for pilots, because if we don't know ourselves well enough, we have a tendency to eliminate ourselves. Kern has to say about self: the most critical component of the airmanship model is yourself. And it's really true, as you'll see as we go through this. If you don't have a good knowledge of yourself, then you aren't going to be able to develop your airmanship. Understanding ourselves may be the most difficult system, if you want to call it that we ever learn. And in some ways it is a system. The human's physiological and psychological systems are far more sophisticated than any machine ever invented. We all know that. Our brains are very complicated, but it's not just our brains, it's our bodies too. And when you put those 2 complicated systems together, if you want to think of them as separate, we have to know both of those pieces of ourselves very well. And you'll see what I mean here as we go through this. It's difficult to do, but not impossible to do. Then we have to think about our self-image problem. That puts us at risk a lot. If we think we're the greatest pilot in the base, and that's all right if you think that way, but you can't let it get overboard to where you're writing checks your body can't cash, as they said in Top Gun. And how can an experienced pilot fly a good airplane into the ground? You know, we call that CFAT, or controlled flight in terrain. Everything's working normally, but the pilot flies into the ground. Well, it comes back to self, as you'll see. Let's first of all take a look at medical airworthiness. Chances are you're more concerned about the performance of your airplane than you are about yourself. I think you'd have to agree with me on that. You give your airplane a thorough pre-flight before every flight, but do you give yourself a thorough pre-flight before every flight? Pilots have a tendency to think they can rise above physiological challenges. Lindbergh is a good example of that. Everybody would probably agree he was one of the great airmen of all time, but the night before his flight across the Atlantic, he didn't get any sleep. He didn't get much sleep the nights prior to that. He was under a lot of stress. People wanting to talk to him all the time. So he actually should not have taken off that morning to fly to Paris. He was in a severe sleep deficit. So like we look at role models like Lindbergh and we all think, well, if we're going to be real pilots, we got to be able to just, you know, burn through the lack of sleep, having a cold, being under stress, but it's not true. We can't rise above those challenges. They affect us. This can-do attitude conflicts with realistic self-knowledge and good airmanship. So can-do is okay as a motivator, but it can't. You've got to eliminate it from your judgment. It's the recognition that you could be the best pilot in the world, but if you are not physically up to par, you are setting yourself up for problems. How we function physiologically and psychologically will have a direct impact on how well we perform in flight. If we are fatigued, suffering from a hangover, I know nobody does that anymore, but this is one of the factors we have to take into consideration. If we're coming down with the flu or a cold, if we're under stress, if we're hypoglycemic, which is low blood sugar, we are not performing up to our expectations. In fact, we can't perform up to our expectations of being a good airman. Those things affect us, and we'll talk about them in detail here a little bit. But if we are suffering from any of these conditions, we are not medically airworthy, period. Failure to perform as expected can be lethal in an aircraft, especially when coupled with unwarranted confidence, overconfidence, and being impaired by one of these factors we just looked at or others that we're going to look at later. You put those two together and you are in a very dangerous situation. We all make mistakes. The last perfect flight I flew was, I guess I never have flown a perfect flight. So we all make mistakes, but we set ourselves up for a fall if we're not medically airworthy. So we can go through a personal medical airworthiness checklist before we take off, and if we're not up to par, we shouldn't even be flying, because that's setting us up to make these mistakes. Airmanship is compromised if you push the limits of your own ability to function, and that's in the physical sense. So if you're tired, but you say, oh, I can do it, I've toughed it out before, I'm going to go fly, or I got to get to this business meeting, whatever it might be, then your airmanship is definitely compromised. When it comes to physical airworthiness, we are our own mechanic. You know, we can't have a doctor on call all the time to check us out before we fly, so we've got to take care of that. It is your self-awareness that is the key to recognizing personal deficiencies. So you've got to get in tune with yourself. I know that sounds kind of touchy-feely, guys, but this is the last frontier of airmanship, of air safety. The machines have gotten very safe. The system is very safe. 80 to 90% of all accidents are caused by pilot error, so it's us. So we've got to become more self-aware. Lack of medical airworthiness leads to subtle and subjective conditions. And I want to emphasize this subtle. Sometimes it's real hard to tell if we're impaired, and sometimes it's subjective too. So these are the conditions: impairment, Subtle incapacitation. We used to always train for this at United, where the sim instructor would whisper in either the co-pilots or the captain's ear, okay, now when you get to the outer marker, I want you to act like you're falling asleep or subtly incapacitated, so that the other pilot could get a little practice dealing with that situation, because in a two-crew airplane, of course, you're counting on both guys doing the job, and if one of them is incapacitated, the other guy has to pick up the whole workload. So it's something to train for. So subtle incapacitation can happen to anybody, and it can happen to you as a single pilot. It just happens slowly, micro sleeps, those kinds of things. Increased complacency and apathy accompany poor physical function. So if you're not in shape, if you are overstressed, if you're in poor physical condition for any reason, you're going to have a tendency to be complacent, which we all know is a big killer in aviation. And apathy is not far behind that. Your personal in-flight parameters become ill-defined. You have a tendency to think you can do more than you really can. You think you're sharper, but you aren't. So they become ill-defined, hard to tell what they are. You begin to take more risks. And you probably can remember somewhere in your flying history here where you were impaired and you took some risks that you normally wouldn't take, and after you got down and started thinking about it, you wonder, why did I take those risks? Well, it might have been because you were somehow impaired. You start to tune out. And, of course, we always have to be sharp and aware and paying attention when we're in the cockpit. But you start to tune out when you are not medically airworthy. You begin to lose situational awareness, and we know situational awareness is critical. Your reaction time is prolonged. You slow down. So these are all things that happen when you're impaired, when you're not medically airworthy. You must consider the medical airworthiness of everyone on your team. Now, if you normally fly by yourself without any other pilots, well, then this doesn't apply to you so much in the cockpit. You're your only team member, but maybe you rely on a friend that flies with you or a spouse that flies with you. They have certain things they take care of. Well, then you've got to be aware of what their condition is. But you've also has to be aware of anybody else on your team, like the fuelers, the flight service guy, anybody who you think might be impaired because of they're not medically airworthy, may not be giving you the support that you are expecting. Practicing good cockpit resource management skills will help identify losses of airmanship, and this also applies to single pilot cockpit resource management. There are ways you can learn what the cues are that indicate that you're starting to become impaired, or you are impaired, and so it can help you to identify losses of airmanship. Formal training is only a small part of establishing medical airworthiness. Only a small part. You've got to do a lot more on your own as you go through your various certificates and ratings, FAA certificates and ratings. Some of them, the private, primarily, but all of them touch on medical airworthiness, physiological factors, as we call them. That's in your formal training, but that's nowhere nearly enough. You've got to read books about it, talk to other people about it, seek out information on medical airworthiness. And we need to take it to the personal level. This is up to you. Nobody else can do this for you. You go to that AME every year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is, and that's only a snapshot look at your medical airworthiness. You're the guy, you're the frontline defense for being impaired. Now, here are some common conditions that can impair an aviator. Hazards at altitude we'll start with. There are quite a few of these here, so there are about, 4 or 5 slides we're going to look at. The first one is hazards at altitude. And we've all heard of hypoxia. And now that we're flying these higher performance airplanes, the Cirrus and so forth, where if they're turbocharged, you can get way up there. You got to be sucking oxygen, so you got to know about the regulations. You got to know about all of the factors that come into using oxygen and how hypoxia can affect you. So it's subtle. Hypoxia is subtle. If you have an ear or sinus block, or any of your passengers have it, or co-pilots have it, you shouldn't be flying, and they shouldn't be flying. I have had this happen to me in jets. And it's painful. It's like having an ice pick stuck in your ear. I have seen other pilots that I'm flying with at the airlines become totally incapacitated. They have to put their seat back, lay back. They're out of it totally because of an ear or sinus block. If you're flying by yourself, that can be a serious factor. Decompression sickness, primarily concerned with scuba diving and then going flying. But again, think not only of yourself, because you wouldn't do that, of course, but you might have a passenger. So it's something, and a passenger getting sick can affect the safety of the flight because you're going to have to do something to take care of that passenger, and that could compromise safety. So we have to think about decompression sickness. Here are some more common conditions. Orientation. Postural disorientation is that seat of the pants orientation. It's your nerves sensing where your muscles are, what they're doing. Gravity affects this, so that's called postural disorientation. Positional disorientation is just when we get to that point where we're lost. We don't know what's going on, and that could be a situation where, okay, we're lost and you got to work your way out of it. Or it could be something that happens, what's going on now, or, that feeling you get in the car when you're driving, you're 5 miles down the road and you don't remember it. That's positional disorientation. We're lost. Temporal disorientation, I call them time warps, but that's where one good example is in an emergency situation. Time slows down. Everybody that's been in that kind of a situation says, oh yeah, time slowed down. I could see everything. Well, that's good in some ways. But that's a time warp. That's temporal disorientation. And for example, what the Air Force has found, that a lot of guys don't eject soon enough because that time is slowed down for them. They think they've got plenty of time to solve the problem, when in fact they don't. Spatial disorientation. This is a little bit different than what you probably think it is. It's also called Vection illusion. Good example of this, you're sitting at the stop sign, or at the stoplight, let's say, with the foot on the brake. The car next to you, for some reason, starts backing up, rolling backwards. Well, you want to jam down on that brake somewhere because you think you're moving forward. It's the effect of your peripheral vision picking up something that isn't really right, and then you get the wrong idea about what's going on and you're disoriented. Spatial disorientation is really Vection illusion. Then what we usually think of spatial disorientation is really called vestibular disorientation. That's where our internal gyros tumble. That's what this graphic is all about. Where I see something that conflicts with our ears or inner ears, and our gyros just tumble. That's vestibular disorientation. Medical airworthiness affects tolerance to all forms of disorientation. So if we're ill, fatigued, taking medications we shouldn't be taking, a lot of different things that could affect this, then these become more likely to happen to you in flight. Sleep. Sleep debt causes impairment. This is empirical data. This is not anybody's opinion anymore. This has been studied by FAA, NASA, the military. I don't think the airlines have spent any money studying it. I'd be surprised. But a lot of flight organizations have spent a lot of time and money, a lot of smart people looking at this. And now it's a fact that sleep debt causes impairment. It's not an opinion. Aviators are notoriously bad at managing their rest periods. We all know how tough that is. You work all day at the office, but you got to get someplace with your airplane that you're committed to get to. You didn't get a good night's sleep the night before. Now you've been up 14 hours or so, and you're going to go out and fly the airplane. Well, you're in a sleep debt, and you are impaired. In fact, the data shows that if you've been awake for about 16 hours, at that point, you're more impaired than if you're legally drunk. Again, this has been proven. We often don't respond to the sleepiness cue. We're so used to powering through sleepiness that we just ignore it most of the time. And again, when you're sleepy, you're impaired. There are two kinds of sleepiness, physiological and subjective. Of course, the physiological is where you haven't been getting enough sleep. Your body is tired. Subjective could be you're stressed all day, the stress is relieved, and now you feel real tired. That's the type of subjective. Jet lag. Jet lag is caused by passing through several time zones. Now, I've got a theory here. You'll probably call it a crackpot theory. But you know the magnetic lines pass from the North Pole to South Pole, so they're oriented north and south around the globe. As we fly through time zones east and west, our electrochemical bodies are moving through magnetic lines of force, and that generally generates electric current. So I don't know if that's it or not, but there's something that we haven't figured out yet exactly what it is that causes jet lag. Part of it is the change in light cycles. That is one part of it, but I think there's more to it than that. Circadian rhythms are disrupted, and circadian rhythms are important to the function of our bodies and brain, especially the sleep cycle. And any airline pilot knows, especially when flying internationally, the reality of jet lag. It is real, and it can be very debilitating. Fatigue. Fatigue is the most consistent physiological cause of impairment. I wrote a book back in 2002 called False Security, The Real Story About Airline Safety. And as I was doing research for that book, of course, fatigue was one of the subjects because I was experiencing that when I was flying for United, especially in the later years when we were up to 85 hours a month, and we were flying a lot, and I felt fatigued a lot. So it really is the most consistent cause. And if you read accident reports in the last 2 or 3 years, the NTSB now is finally starting to put fatigue in as at least contributing cause to a lot of accidents. There are 2 major problems with fatigue. It's very subjective, so there's no scale we can look at, no meter we can look at. It's subjective. It's not caused solely by the lack of sleep or overwork. Stress is a factor, medication, illness, so there are a lot of things that are rolled into the fatigue factor. The trick to fatigue management is to determine what causes the combination of our personal fatigue. So again, we have to be in tune with ourselves. We have to be self-aware, and over time we can start to see the patterns that cause us to be fatigued, and then we can start managing those patterns. Self-medication. There are 2 concerns with self-medication. One is the symptoms of the medical disorder that you're taking the medication for. That's a big concern. And the second one is the side effects of the medication. That's why the FAA prohibits the use of a lot of medications, over-the-counter and prescription, because the effects of those particular medications have already been determined to be impairing. So you have to read the labels on anything you're taking and understand the effect of each ingredient. Here's a surprise for you. I stumbled across this a while back after doing some research for something, but I found out that on the FAA's no-take list is aspirin, but only if it's taken in combination with a couple of other drugs. So even common aspirin can be a no-no if it's in combination with something else. So you have to know, you have to educate yourself if you're taking any of these medications, prescription or over-the-counter, as to how they're going to affect you. And many over-the-counter medications contain alcohol, so you wouldn't take a slug of alcohol and go flying, but so you got to watch out what's in the medications you're taking. One pill may be okay of a particular type of medication, but if you take more of them, now you may become impaired, so you also have to know about that. So once again, you have to know about the effects of combinations of medications. So the best rule of thumb is don't self-medicate and fly. Common illnesses are another cause of impairment. We must be aware of how common illnesses impact our fitness to fly. We must know how common illnesses can affect our performance. And we must realistically balance the risk to safety and airmanship by taking these medications. Common conditions that can impair an aviator also include vision. Vision is the most important sense we use in flight. Conditions that affect vision are wearing designer sunglasses. If they're not prescription or aviator type sunglasses, and even some of those that are on the market fall into this designer sunglass category, that can really impair your vision. Becoming hypoxic impairs your vision. And by the way, let me back up. Becoming hypoxic doesn't just mean you're up there at high altitude and you don't get enough oxygen and you pass out. Flying at night above 5,000 feet for even the young guys, the hypoxic effects, which are very small at that point, but they're still there, reduce your vision, reduce your acuity, visual acuity. And becoming fatigue affects your vision. And as we all know that are getting older affects your vision. So there are a lot of things that affect that vision that is critical to us in flight. And here are some miscellaneous impairments. Alcohol, we all know about that, but the effects of alcohol can hang on for a long time. Hangovers can be very impairing, even several hours after we drink the alcohol. In fact, even maybe for the whole day after we drink the alcohol, if we have too much. Poor nutrition can impair us in many, many different ways. Let me back up there. Poor nutrition, hypoglycemia. More people have hypoglycemic episodes than realize it. That's that kind of lightheaded feeling. You get a little anxious. Maybe your heart rate picks up. That's simply because you have low blood sugar. And that's why it's recommended you eat a little bit frequently while you're flying. You have a snack every couple hours while you're flying. Some nutrition to keep that blood sugar up. Unresolved stress. We all have a lot of unresolved stress in our lives, in modern lives now. That's typical. So we have to address this. We have to recognize it. We have to know how to relieve that stress in ourselves. It's a personal thing. So let's say that we get the green light on our medical airworthiness. However, we're going to evaluate ourselves before flight. We say, okay, we're green. Everything's good. So that means we are ready for takeoff. We can go out and fly. But hold on a second. Physical health is only half the picture. We have to also look at psychological airworthiness. How well do you understand and appreciate your psychological picture? I'd bet not very well. This is a tough one for all of us, especially us guys. It's pretty tough to evaluate where our heads are at all the time. So many factors not directly related to our physical health can impact safety of flight. So it's not just, again, not just the physical health. Awareness of factors that have an impact on our psychological airworthiness is critical. Hazardous attitudes are the demons of the aviator's mind. So we're going to look at these hazardous attitudes. You probably come across them when you study for your private. The FAA does a good job of pointing those out. But you can think of those as demons. They're there. They're inside of us all the time. We have to beat them back all the time. Once we get good at getting rid of those hazardous attitudes, they all want to start creeping back in. So here are those hazardous attitudes. Get-there-itis, right? That's the big one. A lot of people have killed themselves with get-there-itis, get-home-itis. That's an attitude, and it's in all of us pilots. We're mission-oriented. We want to accomplish the mission. When we plan a flight, we want to go out and complete that flight. So that get-there-itis is present all the time, and we have to be aware of it and recognize it when we start to get it ourselves personally. We have to come up with our personal warning light for get-there-itis and then crank that into our judgment, because that affects judgment. Anti-authority attitude, screw the FAA. Those regs are only for the weak pilots. They're for the other guys. I'm so good I don't have to pay attention to the regulations. Anti-authority attitude, very dangerous. Machismo, I'm a man, I can do it. I'm John Wayne. Just stick that Bowie knife in my teeth and I'll go out there and fly through that thunderstorm. And this machismo generally gets going in groups of guys around the airport, groups of pilots that know each other. Invulnerability. Of course, when we're teenagers, we know that we are totally invulnerable. Nothing can get us. That has a tendency to wear off as we get older, but as pilots, especially as we increase our capabilities, this starts creeping back in, that we feel invulnerable. It won't happen to us. It'll happen to the other guy. Come back to that. That's a good time to talk about the general aviation accident rate, which is so high. And I think one of the reasons for that is, the real risk for a good aviator with good judgment is pretty close to zero. We all know that. Not zero, but pretty close. But if you are not as sharp as you think you are, then you are going to end up or highly likely to end up in an accident. We have about 4 a day out here right now in general aviation, 4 accidents. And a lot of this comes from this feeling of invulnerability. It won't happen to me. It's going to happen to the other guy. Impulsiveness. You get in a hurry. You decide to do this all of a sudden. Let's say you're cruising along and you see a nice little airport down there that you're going by. You hadn't planned on stopping there, but it looks good. I'm going to stop there. Well, that's okay as long as you're not impulsive about it. You got to take the time to think that decision through. You've got to consider all the factors you have to consider when you are getting into the traffic pattern and landing there. So impulsiveness is an attitude, and I've seen it in a lot of pilots. Another place where it manifests itself is in a hurry to get off the ground. So you rush checklist or eliminate the checklist, you cut corners. I was given a flight review to a guy in a Cessna 421 here a couple months back, and we went up to Rockford. And this is after we had gone through a 2-day recurrent, and we talked all about the unimpressive single engine performance of light twins and even those medium twins. And we were taking off on the south runway, which I think is, I don't know, it's long over there, maybe 10,000 feet. And this guy chose to take off at an intersection that probably gave up 2,000 of that. So we had plenty of runway by the book, but why rush it? Taxi down there and use that whole runway, because runway behind you is the second most useless thing in aviation. Resignation is a hazardous attitude. If you have a tendency when you get under stress, things start piling up, to just go into resignation. Oh well, nothing I can do about it. If that's an attitude you have, you either need to change it or get out of the cockpit, because that will kill you. Complacency, we all know about that. Well, I've flown this route so many times, I don't even need to get the chart out. I know where I'm going, know what I'm doing. But many, many times, that attitude will come around and bite you. Airshow syndrome, watch this, right? Buzz the girlfriend's house, make the low pass down the runway with the abrupt pull-up and steep bank. That kind of stuff, as we all know, kills people pretty quickly. And that's called the airshow syndrome, and that's an attitude. And, of course, emotional jet lag, not the physical jet lag of flying through time zones. That's the same kind of feeling that you have when you have jet lag, but it's caused by your emotional state. And the most dangerous pilots I ever flew with in my life were at United Airlines, and they were guys going through divorces. They just were not with it at all, because they were in this emotional pit that really impaired them. And that's an attitude, emotional jet lag. Also, excessive professional deference. If you're flying with a senior pilot, you can't take the attitude that this guy knows everything. You gotta be your own pilot. I'm sorry, your own PIC, even if you're flying with somebody. Not that you take the airplane away from them, but you have to be. Don't assume that he knows everything and he's watching everything. And the passenger co-pilot syndrome is similar to the excessive professional deference. That attitude is, if you're flying as a co-pilot or as a passenger, you have a tendency just to be along for the ride. That's the wrong attitude. As I mentioned, with the excessive professional deference, you've got to be in the loop. Psychological stress is a big one. In addition to knowing and preventing hazardous attitudes, we must also be aware of our psychological stress levels. The burden of severe psychological stress alone can exceed our capacity to cope. Gauging when too much stress will affect our ability to aviate is a key to knowing ourselves. Now, I've got a little tell on my stress level. My left eyelid flutters a little bit. I get a little tick in my left eyebrow anytime I get up to past a certain point of stress, it usually happens with a combination, like I'm fatigued, I'm in a high workload situation, I'll start getting that little flicker of my left eyelid. So I know when I feel that I got to back off. I've just gone over the line with my stress. So there are things that you can develop for yourselves that will tell you, at least give you an indication that you're getting too much stress. However, good stress can be as dangerous as bad stress. You just won the lottery, you just had a new kid, you just got married. Those kinds of stressors, even though they're good stress, are also dangerous, so you have to be aware of them. Any deviation goes too far in either direction, bad stress, good stress, can upset our psychological equilibrium, and that's what we want when we're flying, psychological equilibrium. Now, Kern has some comments on personal airworthiness. Personal airworthiness is a personal responsibility. It rests on our physical and psychological boundaries. The wider those boundaries are, because we're in better shape, we know ourselves, the better our airworthiness is. If we fail to appreciate this fact, we undercut any effects towards improvement. So if you decide that you want to pursue airmanship excellence, you've got to get tuned into your personal airworthiness. Although it is critically important to recognize when we are impaired, it is much easier to stay physically and psychologically healthy. Easier said than done, but it is. Rather than trying to recognize when we become impaired and then have some fixes for it, we can open up those boundaries by being in better shape. This increases personal performance potential and makes it much easier to recognize impairment. Maturity is one of the marks of an airman. And of course, maturity is not necessarily related to age. So if we want to be a good airman, we've got to approach it in a mature manner. The ability to admit to ourselves and others that we are not fit to fly is an essential key to good airmanship. And this is hard to do, to tell others, like, you got people lined up to take a trip with you, and it turns out you couldn't get a good night's rest the night before, you recognize that you're fatigued. That's a hard thing to do, to say, well, we're not going to go today because I'm fatigued. But you must do that. You must be willing to admit it. But proactive measures can help prevent these necessities. Work out, eat right, sleep right, avoid overindulgence, relieve stress, don't over-medicate, and stay healthy. Take care of your mind and body so that when you call upon them in flight, they can take care of you. All right. We've got a couple more things to look at here, but let's stop at this point to see if you have any questions or comments. If you do, please raise your hand. I'll give you just a minute. Okay, either everybody's sleeping or everybody is tuned in and there are no questions and no comments. I'm surprised here. We got a bunch of pilots in the room and I'm not hearing a bunch of opinions on what we're talking about here. Let's look at some case studies. Now, these all come from the book, Redefining Airmanship. I didn't go outside the book and look for NTSB reports because Kern, in this chapter of the book that talks about self, has some pretty good examples here, some pretty good case studies, so I just used those. Case study number 1. This guy was an airline maintenance test pilot. If you don't know what that is, every airline has usually line captains who are trained and approved to go out and do test flights on aircraft when they come out of certain levels of maintenance. He was a very experienced line captain. He depressurized the cabin to check the pressurization system, and he had an engine shut down. But he was depressurized at 15,000 feet. He did not use supplemental oxygen. He thought he was, Chuck Yeager, 15,000. Geez, that's not very high. So he didn't put any supplemental oxygen on. But when he got back from the flight, he reported to the flight surgeon that he thought he had a stroke. He had dizziness, blurred vision, weakness, and general discomfort when he was flying the airplane. But what he really had was hypoxia. Turns out he had not been, he's not an ex-military pilot, so he hadn't been through any altitude chambers, so he didn't recognize the symptoms of hypoxia. So there's one example of hypoxia creeping up on you. The second case it was a low IMC approach in a light twin, and there were only people on board with a pilot and one passenger, and the passenger was in the right front seat. The pilot briefed the passenger to look for the approach lights when they started the approach. This is a real low approach. The passenger was not a pilot, but the passenger had some flight instruction, and he had flown with the pilot on this flight before in IFR conditions. The approach went smoothly, went down to minimums, but the runway wasn't there, so the pilot executed a missed approach at the decision altitude. Unfortunately, the passenger grabbed the controls and almost killed both of them. He pulled back on the controls, they pitched way up, the pilot was able to overcome that, then the passenger pushed forward on the yoke and rolled, I think it was left, but he went into a steep roll, so the passenger was making control inputs. And it turns out that the passenger was a victim of spatial disorientation and high stress. So it's real dangerous. I know we all do it. We put non-trained people in that right seat next to us. Generally, no problem at all, but we've got to be very careful about them getting into situations where they will grab those controls. This one ended okay. Nobody got hurt, but it could have been a fatal. Case study number 3. This was a mid-air collision between two Air Force F-15s. They were both very experienced pilots. The accident board determined after the accident that one of the pilots was impaired due to excessive personal commitment, fatigue, and illness. So he had a trifecta there. He was doing a whole bunch of things. He was tired, didn't get enough sleep, and he was also ill. He was working on a master's degree and instructing a Bible class when he wasn't flying, in addition to everything else. He had flu symptoms the day before the flight, so the warning flags were there, but the pilot ignored them, and they ended up having a midair. So that covers the first of the 5 pillars of knowledge, knowledge of self. In the next webinar, next Saturday, we're going to cover knowledge of aircraft. And that's session 6. Now, you'll have to register for that session. Registering for one session does not register you for all of them. So when you get the notice from the FAA, I think you probably already have it, about next week's session, go ahead and click on the link to take you to the GoToWebinar site and register for session 6. Here is my contact information. Feel free to call me, email me. I'm always interested in talking with folks about airmanship. If you have any questions, I certainly want to get them answered for you. Any other ideas that you might want to contribute, appreciate that. So feel free to contact me. You might want to, if you have not already, go to airmanshipexcellence.org. That's that website I showed you early on in this presentation. A lot of resources there for you, a lot of information about airmanship excellence. And I'm going to leave you with what Yeager had to say. If you're going to fly, do it right.